Hello, my name's Tom Schaefer. I'm pastor of Faith United Lutheran Church, and this is the second Sunday of Easter. Easter is actually a 50-day long celebration, and this is the second Sunday of Easter. Welcome to Faith United Online. So our reading today is from the 24th chapter of the Gospel according to St. Luke, starting at the 13th verse. Now on that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place there in these days?" He asked them, "What things?" They replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all of this, it is now the third day since these things took place. Moreover, some women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said he was alive." Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see him. Then he said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" Then beginning with Moses and the prophets, he interpreted it to them, the things about himself in all the scriptures. As they came near the village to where they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on. But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it is almost evening, and the day is now nearly over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us?" That same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions gathered together. They were there saying, "The Lord has risen indeed, and he has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road, and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread. Last week, I was meeting with someone who suddenly remembered why I looked familiar to them. They remembered me from my business, the Black Cloister, and I appreciate meeting people who loved my business, but it's always a little disheartening also, because it's a reminder that ultimately the business didn't survive. And that's a little painful. Things didn't go as planned. That feeling, magnified 100-fold, is what Jesus' followers were feeling. The long waiting and watching for the Messiah they believed had ended with his coming. They believed that he was going to restore Israel to its prominence, that he was going to be raised up into power once they arrived in Jerusalem. And then the events of that week took place, and Jesus died. And not only did he die, but his death was a humiliating death, a death on a cross like a criminal. All the expectation, everything that they had given up, ended like this. Jesus, their teacher, their leader, mentor, the man they believed was the Messiah, was dead. Jesus would be remembered. He'd be remembered as a great leader, but apart from the resurrection, I mean, that's all that he is. He stands in a long line of men who had been murdered. Martin Luther King Jr., Gandhi, Abraham Lincoln, and like all of them, his death has meaning. His sacrifice would have the power to motivate people, but that's it. A man who died on a cross 2,000 years ago can't truly do anything for me today. Not about my sins, not about my problems. His teachings can inspire me. His death can inspire me. But without his rising from the dead, well, in the end, he's only human. And that is the way many people look at Jesus. A great man, lived, died, taught us about love and peace and doing what's right. And being one of the many great people who had ever lived, we can look at his teachings and we can pick and choose from them as to which ones we think will make our life better. But he's not the Lord. He's not the Messiah, the Savior. That is the very thing two followers of Jesus were struggling with as they walked along the road back to their homes just 3 days after the crucifixion. Jesus had died. They're trying to figure out what this all means. What does it mean for them now? And as they're doing this, Jesus, risen from the dead, begins to walk with them. And they don't recognize him. And we don't know why this is, but we can infer something from the text. The Greek says their eyes were kept from recognizing him. So perhaps in order to seize the teaching moment, Jesus did not allow himself to be recognized. And with that in mind, Jesus asked them, "What are you discussing together as you walk along?" Their reaction demonstrates both their disappointment and their faltering faith in Jesus. They stop, their heads down, and they say, "Well, about Jesus. He was a prophet." Now notice right there already they've demoted him to prophet. They don't refer to him as Lord or Messiah because, quite frankly, at this point, given the way things ended, that's impossible for them to believe. So the most they can say is that we had hoped. We had hoped he was the Messiah. But that hope is gone now. The stories of the resurrection had already begun, but at this point they were just stories. So now Jesus begins addressing their unbelief. It says at verse 25 that he said to them, "How foolish you are and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did you not know that the Christ had to suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" And beginning with Moses and the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning him. Now, I want to point out that this is the approach many Christians take with other people. We try to prove the resurrection to them. We try to use the Bible to prove the resurrection to people. And what I want you to take note of here is that that approach didn't even work for Jesus. Because the only thing that can move us from unbelief to belief, as we're about to see, is opening the door to a relationship with Jesus and inviting him in. That's what moves us from unbelief to belief. And in fact, that's what happens next in our story. They invite Jesus in to stay with them. And he sits at table with them, and he breaks bread with them. And sharing in that meal, their eyes were opened. Just a few days before the events that are happening in our reading today, Jesus had established this promise that when we eat the bread and drink the wine that he has blessed, we enter into covenant with him. We enter into relationship with him. And in the context of this relationship, all the teaching and meaning of Jesus' life are opened up to them. The relationship led to faith, and faith led to recognizing it was the risen Jesus who was breaking bread with them. And that's the point here, that it really takes no faith to believe that Jesus lived and died. But the resurrection can't be believed without faith. Because if it happened, as someone told me one day, it changes everything. Some years ago, there was a couple I was doing some marriage counseling for, and one of the members of that couple was a non-believer. And the other was a member of my church and very much a believer. And so we talked about Jesus. You know, we discussed that. We discussed faith. And one of the things that he said was, he said, I don't have any problem believing in Jesus. He says, it's the resurrection that's the tough part. I can't believe in the resurrection. And then he went on to say this. He said, in a sense, I'm as stubborn and rigid in my beliefs as any Christian, because if I believe the resurrection, it changes everything. And he is absolutely dead on. It all comes down to this. If Jesus died and stayed dead, then study his words, study his life. But if he rose, then he really is the Son of God. He really is Lord and Savior. And you can't pick and choose from what he said anymore. Because if he rose and if he is the Son of God, then every word he ever spoke are the most important words that were ever spoken. Everything he ever did is the most important example of what life should be. But also, his death is more than any other death. Because he rose, his covenant remains. His promise is intact. His death removes the stain of sin. His resurrection defeats death. Anyone in covenant with him, in relationship with him, because of this, is in relationship with God. And all of those promises are yours. There is no convincing someone about who Jesus is, that he is the Son of God and that he died and rose 3 days later. You can't convince somebody of that. It's a matter of faith. But what I can tell you is that faith begins with the small step of inviting Jesus in. You don't have to even be sure of who he is, but just be willing to take the risk of spending more time with him. It all begins there. Honestly, friends, without the resurrection, there's no reason to be here. There's no reason to be listening to this. But as my friend said years ago, the resurrection changes everything. Because that means Jesus is alive. He is here. Maybe you don't recognize him. Maybe this Bible stuff doesn't make a whole lot of sense to you. But invite Jesus in. Begin a relationship with him and see if that relationship does not lead to faith, and that faith will lead you to understanding. Hey everyone, thanks for joining us this week. Take a moment and hit the subscribe button if you will. Certainly share this message with someone. If you're moved to do that, would love to know that you've done that also. And if it's meant anything to you, then please say so in the comments below. I do read those and would appreciate hearing that this message has touched your life. So again, hit the subscription button, hit the notification bell so you'll know when new videos come up. And until next week, God bless, keep safe.